So, okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for, I think this is now our third or fourth OHDSI Australia seminar. And I'm really delighted to introduce you to Mui Van Zandt, who's kind enough to present today for us on the long and winding path to data standardization in OMOP. I know Mui's got a slide introducing herself, so I'll let her do that. But we're extremely lucky to, listen to her, and she's had over 20 years experience in data standardization and OMOP. And I think here in Australia, we can really learn a lot from her in this process. So I might hand over to Mui. Just quickly, some housekeeping. We are recording today's session, so it will be available on ohdsi-australia.org website. So please distribute to people who weren't able to make it. And I'll now hand over to Mui. So thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure being here. Like Nicole says, I'm going to present to you guys a little bit about data standardization in OMOP and why it's long and windy. Okay, so a quick introduction to myself. I'm a senior director at IQVIA. It's an OMOP data development and product development. I manage a OMOP development team, actually multiple OMOP development teams, and I've worked in this data software industry for over 20 years. I'm dating myself, okay? And I do a lot of different type of technology development. In the last 5 years, I've joined OHDSI and have become a big part of OHDSI. I lead some of the different working groups. I participate in the OHDSI steering committee for both the general OHDSI one, and I also participate in the APAC one. I did lead the Themis working group, but we've now merged with the OMOP CDM and vocabulary working group. I also sit on the China OHDSI OMOP vocabulary working group, as well as the China steering committee group as well. So, and then I'm also one of the members of Women of OHDSI. You guys might have heard of me and seen me sometimes, because I do tutorials as well. I do the OMOP CDM tutorial during the symposiums, at the US Symposium, China Symposium, Korea Symposiums, different symposiums. And I guess in 2018, I was honored enough to get the Titan Award for Community Collaboration, because I do all these things out there in the community. From an Asia Pacific side, I actually am working with a lot of the different countries to try to get the Asia Pacific community to come together as a whole. And Nicole is part of that community as well. So I don't know, I think Nicole, you might have already started advertising this, but we are having an APAC symposium this year in December. So please look forward to seeing more of that on your website and knowing more about that in the coming month or so. And we would love to get all of you guys to join. Okay. So what does it mean? Nicole asked me to come and talk to you guys a little bit about OMOP and the process of converting your data from whatever it is, an EHR, EMR, claims, registry, survey, whatever it might be, into OMOP. Okay. So what I wanted to cover with you guys are a couple of key areas. The first one is the methodology, how to do the conversion, the type of resources that you use, and potentially the different type of technologies you want to use. Okay, the second one is some of the common myths that we get out there, and that's something you guys are going to run into potentially when you work with others who doesn't understand OMOP, or they have certain doubts about OMOP. They're going to come tell you these, well, what about this? What about this? So I want to go through some of those with you that we've heard quite a bit. And then just to cover on some of the common issues that we get when we do the conversions, and then finally to cover some of the recommendations that, to overcome some of these problems that you guys might have. Okay. So the first thing I want to go over is the OMOP conversion process flow. What this has in it is the resources that are necessary, as well as some of the tools that OHDSI has out there that you guys can use to help do your conversion. Okay, the first type of people that you really want to have in your group when you form these groups to do these OMOP conversion is both a data expert and a CDM expert. Okay. The CDM expert is someone who really truly understands the OMOP CDM model itself, because when you try to figure out all the rules that are necessary, you really need to understand how that field fits properly into the CDM field and how it's being used to know what the rules are to move into it. You want a data expert because you need someone who actually understands your native data, the source data that it's coming from, right? Because then you can better properly design the rules that are necessary to move into it. Now, we typically call these guys, in our group, we call them data analysts, who basically they go and analyze the data. You need a medical expert because there has to be someone who understands. I'm sure you guys know this better than I do. All the different terminologies that shows up in a system, some of them can be text fields, sometimes they're not, or how the data got into that system, how someone keyed it in, right? That's at times very important. So you want that medical expert to help you with those questions and help you validate or potentially even create those mappings that are necessary for the codes. And then you also, of course, have to have a technical expert who can actually take this data and these business rules and these medical codes and then translate that and develop the code to create the ETL. Okay. Now, you typically have to go through 3 different phases: the analysis phase, the data quality phase, the development phase, and the data quality phase. Okay. These are some of the tools that are available, that are out there in the OHDSI community that you can use. White Rabbit is a data profiling tool. Rabbit in a Hat is an ETL documentation tool. Usagi is a tool that helps you, that has a little bit of NLP in it to help do a best match for codes, medical codes. And then Achilles is a quality checking tool, as well as the data quality dashboard. That's also a checking tool. Now, we put this in because we say that as part of it, don't just use these guys, but have your own internal quality checking. Now, development, what we recommend is that you have some kind of code repository that stores the code, such as Subversion or GitHub, GitLab, whatever it may be that you guys use. It is a lot more effective because if you have more than one person, you're not stepping on each other's toes. And then another recommendation we have that you may or may not be able to do, depending on your group size, is continuous integration. Having something that helps you be able to maintain your environment automatically and deploy your code from environment to environment to environment. What we typically use within my group is called Jenkins. It's free. You can go down there and download it. If you guys really want to know more information about these, we can talk about it at a later date, or ask me questions afterwards, and I can show you guys where they are on the OHDSI community. The second thing that I want to put out there is you got the resources and all, but there's also a methodology in which you develop your conversion. Okay, most people who do ETL conversions, they typically do what we call the waterfall approach, which means you develop the whole thing, the whole conversion before you show it to anybody. You figure out what all the business rules are. You then have the developers code the whole thing, and then you test the whole thing before you hand it over to the end user to say, here, I'm done, the whole project. Okay. Our group doesn't do it this way, and actually quite a few people out in the OHDSI community does not do it that way. What we found out with that is that it causes, it potentially can cause quite a bit of delay, because it's kind of like building everything in a black box, and you don't know what's going on in that black box until at the end, boom, you know, the surprise pops up. So what we follow is what we call the sprint methodology, the agile methodologies, agile scrum, and we do things in sprints, okay? So what we typically do, what that means is basically you pick out intervals, iterative intervals, so 2-week intervals typically is what we pick out. And in those 2 weeks, you scope out what you can do. And then when you're done with it, show it to your stakeholders, show it to your audience. So every 2 weeks, we always have something to show. So this is a sample timeline of what you would do, right? What we call Sprint 0, which is the initiation of the project, gathering all the data, doing some initial analysis, then Sprint 1, starting to document the specifications for some of the lookup tables, in this case, dimension tables, like the person table, the provider table, the care site table, right? Because those are necessary in all the other tables. And then also start identifying what can't you map when it comes to terminology? Do you guys not have, you know, a lot of hospitals have their own typically coding system for procedures. Some people you have their own coding system for diagnosis. Well, if those aren't already out there in the OHDSI vocabulary, then you have to custom map those. So identifying what they are so you can start working on that while you're parallelly at the same time working on the conversion of the tables itself. So then sprint 2, your developers would basically be developing the code to actually do the dimension tables that you did in sprint 1, while your analyst team, whoever that may be, if you have a different team, be analyzing the next tables, like loading the procedure table or the drug table, right? So you do things in chunks, and then you can show people basically what you've done. And with an OMOP CDM, you can actually, if you do the person table, the provider table, the care site table, the observation table, and the drug exposure table, honestly, you can already start doing research. So, you know, if you start, you know, you can do line of therapies, you can do certain things with that information already. So if you do it in chunks like that, then you're able to then show your researchers, here's something you can play with already and start learning about it, right? And then you can add in diagnosis tables, then you can add in procedure table. So slowly by slowly, you're showing folks what the value of your product is that you've already developing. So Agile Scrum is used really for software development, but we've taken that and implemented it into our OMOP conversions. And this is what we push all the different people to use. Even in our trainings, this is what we push people to do, because we've seen how this is much more helpful to help convince people why the OMOP conversion works and why what we've done is valid, okay? So the other thing that I've already mentioned, but I want to talk a little bit more about it, is the custom source code mapping. That is very big in many, many different data assets, especially EHRs and EMRs, because you guys do have a lot of text fields, and you also have a lot of medical codings that really don't exist in OHDSI. So getting ahead of this is much, much easier. And will help you in the long run. We used to not do this first. We used to, you know, do the conversion and then wait for this, and it ends up pushing out our timeline like crazy. So what we've learned to do is do this in parallel. And there are two ways to doing it. One is Usagi, the other is the vocabulary team. Ignore this whole paid by IQVIA, because this is what we do. I pay the OHDSI vocabulary team to do the work, but you can actually request the OHDSI vocabulary team to help you do some of the work if you guys don't know how to do it yourself. Okay. And what we do is, what we try to do is, we don't try to take the whole list and map it, because if you take the whole list, sometimes you got like thousands and thousands of codes. Okay. You don't want to go through thousands and thousands of codes. So what we do is we do a frequency check, where we say that if I cover this many codes up to this portion of it, it represents 68% of my transactions. So what we pick at the beginning is to say, okay, where's that line do I cut off? So our typical cutoff point to start a project is at 85. So if I can cover 85 of my transactions by translating these guys, right, these codes, then I'm good for phase 1. Phase 2, you keep going higher and higher and higher and higher. Now in this case, right, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 more codes. So we say, okay, we'll go all the way up to here, 95%, then I stop. These guys, I won't do. Because the one thing we've learned is don't try for perfection. And that's part of the methodology of Agile. You want to do it iteratively and don't shoot for perfection. Shoot for your most, what we call minimal viable product, MVP, right? So our guideline is 85% typically, because we found that 85% of the time, at most times, do cover a lot of, you know, the terminology already. So that's something you guys have to gauge. But basically, what we do is we run a query and do a count and what percentage of the total it makes up. And you can share this with your stakeholders or whom you're working with to show them, because then they can be convinced as well. Okay, I don't have to worry about these guys because it only covers like this much of my transactions, 419 of my transactions versus 442 of my transactions. Okay, Of course, I'm going to do this one versus that one, right? So that's kind of how we kind of estimate and figure out how to do mapping, okay? So those are some of the very quick discussions around methodology. Now, the next thing I want to cover is myths. There's going to be 5 or 6 of these, okay? There's 6 of these. So the first one that we get a lot is loss of data. By doing an OMOP conversion, you're losing data. That's what we get all the time, okay? Second one is I lose accuracy in the conversion because you're actually having someone touch your original source data and convert it. So I don't know whether or not you're accurate or not. Okay, and the third one is you lose the accuracy of the vocabulary mapping because, like I said here, we don't do 100% of it, right? And how do you guarantee that someone mapped it properly? Okay, the fourth one we get is it takes too much time because most conversions do take quite a bit of time. Sometimes I've had folks who've done conversions and they've taken 2 years to do one because they keep switching out their resources. Okay, ours typically take anywhere between 3 to 4 months, and that's with experts in it. And I have to say it's because it does take that long. The fifth myth that we get is you don't have my use case in OMOP. We've had a psychiatry working, we have some of our partners that are psychiatry hospitals. They're like, you can't cover our imaging results, and you can't cover our test results from CT scans because they're 3 dimensions. And in your measurement table, you have only 2 dimensions. So I shouldn't use OMOP, right? So those are some of the things that we get. And then the 6th one is I have to learn new terminology because as most of you guys are aware, when we convert things to the standard OMOP, the terminology there is SNOMED, it's RX norm, and it's not what the people are used to. I think you guys use ICD-9s. They're not used to that, right? You're not used to using SNOMED, you're used to using ICD-9. It's like, I don't want to use your data because it's not in my code. So these are some of the myths that we get. And what I'm going to tell you is how you can explain to people that these myths may or may not be proper. So the first one, I'm sorry, can someone, whoever's not mute?
Yeah, Mui, could I
Yes.
interrupt? Could everybody mute their microphones, please? We've got some interference, so if everyone could mute, because I can mute everybody, but unfortunately that'll mute it will mute Mui as well. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Roger. So the first one, like we said, is loss of data, right? So we get this a lot. I even got EMA asking me this as well. They're like, wait, you know, because we actually work with the EMA and they asked me the same question, and so did the FDA. It's like, wait, you've done this conversion, but I've heard that you lose data because things are dropped out. Okay, I heard that you lose patients, that you can lose counts, you can lose this and that, and it's true. But it's not that we lose data. Okay, we do drop data. That is 100% true. But as part of the OMOP conversion process, it's not just about converting the data over to a common data model. It's actually also about cleaning up the data and putting in analytic rules that you typically always have to put in when you do an analysis. We put it into the ETL process. We put it into the conversion process so that it's already pre-done. Okay, and that then the people who does the analysis don't have to worry about it, and it's done one way because people interpret things 50 different ways, right? And if you have 50 different researchers, but you have the same rule, they may interpret it like 4 or 5 different ways. So it is true that we actually do remove things, and what we remove things are patients, like dirty data, right, or duplicate patient IDs. Or we have rules like one of our EMR has a rule that says that EMR comes in and it has all the data in it, and there was no cleansing process to start off with. So part of their rule is that if this person doesn't have this flag turned on and it wasn't before this date and it wasn't, this other date was X, Y, and Z, then they're not considered a valid patient, okay? And what we did is we said, okay, then if they're not a valid patient and they have to write this into their analysis every single time, that they have dropped these patients anyways, right? So when we did the OMOP conversion, we said, forget it. Why let you do an analysis? I'm going to drop those patients from the OMOP model to start off with. So all you have in the OMOP model are your active and clean patients. And from that, we actually dropped 3 million patients. Okay, so we went from 17 million to 14 million patients. And when actually EMA first saw that, they're like, oh, you dropped 3 million patients. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Yes, but you would have done the same if you did the same, if you did the analysis as well. It's just when you do the analysis, your cohort is smaller. Mine, I'm not looking at a cohort. I'm looking at the whole data set. So those are things you just have to explain to them and to talk to them about. And we have a lot of those rules actually already built into the OMOP CDM. And there's 2 sites that you can go to check out resources that has some of those rules in it already. One is the CDM wiki, and the other is actually our Themis wiki as well. Those 2 sites, which is down here, which is in the presentation that you guys will get later on, we talk about some of those rules. What are those rules that we drop? People without birth dates, birth years. That is a rule in the OMOP CDM. If you don't have a year of birth, we drop you. Okay, so that has to be there. We have to drop you because what we say is most of the time people that does research, they require the year of birth. Okay. Another one that we do that has to do with data quality, right? Again, it's about losing data. It's about, so what we do is we have a lot of data quality checks that you can do to help you look at that quality, to make sure that it's there and that we didn't drop anything. So there's this data quality report here that you can, our assessment that you can use that's OHDSI based. And it shows you the percentage of business rules that has passed. Overall, we test about 3,000 rules. And we developed this 40 FDA to start off with, actually for government institutions to start off with. And there's something you can actually go download right now yourself. It's on GitHub. These other 2 are actually other things that we do to put on top of the checks that are already here. So these are some of the standard checks that you'll see that is done. So that's another way to show people when they ask you. US Symposium in, I think, 2018. What we showed is basically, you know, a conversion of our data against 2 of our other, one is against itself, and the second one is a different EMR system. The exact same research, writing the exact same code, and looking at the difference between the 2, right? So you're looking at, oh, this is the native version, this is the OMOP version. The age is exactly the same. Okay, and then if you look at these numbers here, they are very similar. They may be off by a little bit, but they're very, very similar. So basically what we're trying to tell people is the accuracy of our conversion is pretty darn good because you can do the same research and get about the same amount of people. Okay. The next thing that we get a lot is the loss of accuracy in the vocabulary. So again, this is because you just don't know what was translated all the time or what was mapped over. So again, to do that, you do have to do some validation studies. And this is an example of the EMA doing a validation study last year. This is actually a paper that's out there. So if you guys are interested, I can send you the paper that has been published. So what they did is they did a comparison, same thing, of a study that they did with the source data and then the same study inside the OMOP CDM. And you can see that basically the trends are very, very similar. They did find one problem with our coding. And what we did, and when they found it, we actually corrected it and then reprocessed the OMOP CDM and sent it back out. So we're not trying to say that there's no problems with the accuracy, right, and the conversions itself. But to help verify that, you can do research, some of these studies to help between your source to your native to figure that out and be able to see it. Because unless you guys do that, as developers, really, we just take a bunch of codes and we write it and then we shoot it across, right? We let the computer figure out everything else. we're not going to sit there and stare at every single record that we've converted. So the best way to do validation against your converted data is to do what we call a source to CDM comparison. Okay. It takes too much time. Okay. We get this all the time. That is accurate. That is very accurate to say. So that's why I talked about the methodologies at the beginning. One, it will take less time if you have the right resources. Two, it will take a lot less time if you have the right methodology in place. And three, it will take less time if you actually do data quality checks against it. Okay. So it does take time. It's just something that you have to explain to your stakeholders or to the people that you're working with. That number one, it's not a simple conversion. Number two, we do take time cleaning things. Number three, we do take time verifying what we've done is accurate so that the quality and the cleanness of the end result is there for you, so that you can do better quality research, and then the amount of time that you require to do the actual research is much less. Okay. The fifth one is we don't have your use case. Okay, and we don't. OHDSI is not going to say that we have all your use cases. That's why we have the OMOP CDM working group. The purpose of that working group is consistently extending the model. As you can see, we've seen the model go from OMOP CDM 2 to 4 to 5 to now 6. Right? What's the difference between 5 and 6? In 6, we've added things like surveys. We've changed the location. We've added location history, and we've restructured like the cost table, because we started introducing insurance people into the OHDSI community, and they said, hey, the insurance just doesn't work so well, or the cost structure and the payer structure here doesn't work so well. So they restructured it. So we're not saying we do cover all the use cases. What we say is we cover the most common use cases and the most common needs that are out there. Okay, the OMOP CDM is not meant to cover every single use case. The reason why it's so powerful is because it's standardized, which means it meets most of the use cases, but not all. Now, if you do have use cases out there that don't work, bring it up. Bring it on and let the OHDSI community know that. Then you start forming these groups like the OHDSI Oncology Working Group, which they have now created an extension for oncology, which now supports regimen, episodes, and oncology type terminology, such as NACER and HEMOINC. Okay, so now we have new vocabulary, we have new extension tables, and all that fun stuff. So, and we have another group, the Psychiatry Working Group. They're working on certain things like new vocabulary as well that only the psychiatry folks use. So there is nothing to say that we can't add extensions to it or modify the model to help fit the purpose of the use cases that are necessary out there. It's just that it has to be, folks have to let us know so that the teams can work together and develop this new model. Okay. The sixth thing is I have to learn new terminology. Okay, again, we don't use ICD-9s, we don't use ICD-10s, but you can get to the SNOMED codes by using the hierarchy and using the mapping that's already existing. And by using tools like Atlas and Athena, you can easily navigate up and down the OMOP vocabularies and be able to look at it from a textual perspective. So not having to remember codes, but knowing that atrial fibrillation, that there are children underneath atrial fibrillation, and these are the children underneath it. And the atrial fibrillation belongs to these two parents up here. So all this already exists inside OHDSI and inside the vocabulary and inside tools such as Athena and Atlas, which helps researchers be able to guide themselves a lot easier without having to memorize codes like ICD-9s, ICD-10s, or in the UK, READ codes. Okay, so it makes life a little bit easier, especially if you use the tools. This stuff is actually quite, the tools are quite useful when it comes to this, especially like even for me. I have a bit of a medical background, but not a deep one. But I've been able to look things up a lot using this and Google. Google really helps. I love Google. Okay. Okay, next we're going to go into a bit more of your common issues. Some of you guys have EHRs, some of you guys have EMRs, registries. So I'm going to first talk about a bit about some of the common issues that we get within EHR systems. We've done quite a few. Some of you guys probably know of Cerner, Epic, right? So those are the big ones that are out there, or proprietary ones. So the first thing that always exists is proprietary coding systems. Regardless of what country you're in, which county you're in, or which state or province you're in, you're always going to run into this. Every hospital typically has their own proprietary coding system. Even within, like in the United States, we say we have to use ICD-9s and ICD-10s. Well, now ICD-10s, no more ICD-9s. But even within our hospitals, they have their own coding system that eventually may translate into ICD-10s, but sometimes don't. So it's expected, and that will require you guys to do a lot of what we call custom mapping to get those codes to the standard codes. And then there's a lot of text fields. A lot of EHRs have lots of text fields, which also requires NLP engines or someone looking through them to figure out what's the best match to a terminology. You can use things like Usagi for that. They're free, or if you want to buy tools, you can buy the tools. Right, and or you can work with the NLP working group, which is developing processes and structures on how to read that. We get a lot of non-clinical events. So in a lot of EHRs, I ran into one that actually in Korea, when we were working with them on one of their quality checks. And one of my quality checks that I have for them is the length of an inpatient stay. Okay, so it's still normal to have people in the hospital for a year, right? So we have a query that went and checked for people that had stays longer than 1 year. Just one stay that was longer than a year. And we ended up finding quite a few people who had 100 years of a stay. One single stay was 100 years. And I asked why. I don't think anyone can afford to stay in a hospital for 100 years. So we started looking things up, and basically what we found out is that they didn't know what the end date of something was, so they used a fake end date to denote the end of that stay. So which caused it to go out way, way then. So what we told them to do is don't do that. When you can use the end of your data as your end date, because that ends it, or you just don't put an end date in. Okay, so we've had those before. We've also had a different database where they were registering into the condition occurrence table because what we were looking for is people who had activity after death. And we found the set of patients who constantly had activities like a year after they were dead, but they were really dead. It was just what we ended up finding is that they inserted a record into the condition occurrence table because someone came and picked up paperwork that was related to that patient a year later. So we said, we basically told them, one, either you move them into the observation table because that's not a condition for the patient, or you don't even bring those in because how does that benefit you when it comes to research? How does that benefit that patient when it comes to research? It doesn't, because it's someone picking up paperwork. For what purpose? It didn't say. It's just someone picking up paperwork. So that really wasn't much useful information. So we said either one, you move it into the observation table and put a note in there, or two, just don't bring those in at all. So those are some of the things that we've encountered. I'm sure you guys have those as well. And then there's also these multiple inputs on records, right? We get a lot of these. You can have multiple coding systems and you put one of each in there. So we've seen people put in a SNOMED code, an ICD-9 code, an ICD-10 code, okay, and then a text field. So which one do you take? Because sometimes it's not the exact same thing. And we've had this before. So we ended up creating a business rule that basically went and said, okay, this one, this one, this one, you first use this field, then you use this field, then you use this field, then you use this field, right? Now, that's the scenario where they're all in one record. We've also had it where it's multiple records, okay, but it's same person, same diagnosis, but stored as multiple coding systems multiple times. So instead of one record, there's 3 records, but it's exactly the same. So again, we write in business rules to do a bunch of deduplication on that as well. So those are the most common ones. Now, there are other more common ones that we've run into outside of EHR, just any type of conversion. Once you move it over, some of this has to do with the data. Some of it actually doesn't have to do with the data. Some of it has to do with people not truly understanding each field or even each table within the OMOP CDM. Okay, so these are 4 of them that I'm going to go over. The first one is the wrong type ID. This I find everywhere. I don't know if you guys know a lot about the type ID. So what I'm talking about is the drug type ID, drug concept type ID, the procedure occurrence type ID, the condition occurrence type ID. When people see that type ID, they think it's the type of drug that the patient took. I get that a lot actually in the Asian countries, because in Korea, Japan, and China, they have both Western medicine and actually Chinese herbal medicine, right? So what I've seen a lot is they put in there that this is a Western medication versus this is a Chinese herbal medication. And what they don't realize is actually that's not what the type is. What the type stores is actually where your data came from, okay? So where this record came from. Is this record prescribed by a doctor, or is this record filled by a pharmacy? Is this record self-reported by the patient? Was this record administered by a physician, right? Or in diagnosis, was this record their primary condition, their secondary condition, self-reported condition? So some of the examples that you see here, right? So we look at visit and the type. So what type of visit was this? This was a visit that was derived from an EHR record. It was derived from a encounter on a claims, or it was a clinical study visit. So that's actually what the type is. It's not meant, and how you find that is actually in Athena, you put in the type, the domain is the type concept, and then it's a standard, and the vocabulary is visit type, and you'll be able to find quite a few of these. Actually, I think it's the class is visit type. And you change it to drug, you change it to procedures, and you'll be able to find that, okay? Second one is missing CDM tables. A lot of people tell me it's like, you can't be. Why would be people missing, tables? Because they should always populate it. What we get most actually is the 3 error tables that always gets missing. The drug error table, the drug dose error table, the dose error table, as well as the condition error table. Because most people don't actually realize that they don't think it's necessary because it's not required, right? And they don't know how to come up with those. Those 3, actually, the code for those are sitting in GitHub in Odyssey, so you can get those. We've actually seen a lot of these other ones missing. We've actually seen observation period, which is a required one, missing quite a bit, because people don't know how to calculate the observation period based on an EHR. Because the observation period is basically time span in which you've seen the patient is observed in your data asset, right? So a lot of people go, well, I don't have like their insurance information, so I don't know when they were inside my system and when they left my system. So there's actually a Themis rule that actually says if you don't know it, then it's the first date of your transaction to the last date of your transaction for that patient. So that's your observation period. But again, a lot of people don't know that, so they just don't populate it. So we have actually a business rule that checks to see if a person has at least one observation period inside their record. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they won't. We've actually seen like observation the table itself missing because most people don't know what to put in it, or they think it's not useful information, so they don't populate it. And we go over their data with them. So, well, this is something you want to keep, right? Yeah, but I don't know where to put it. Well, you put it in the observation table. And here's how you set it up to put it in the observation table. So that's something, this is another thing we run into. My favorite, abnormal values. You get this with measurements and drugs all the time. Okay, measurement tops it. Measurement is always a mess. None of my team likes playing with the measurement table or likes coding the measurement table because the codes are always such a mess in there. The values are always a mess, and then the units are always a mess because there's so much text fields in any type of lab results, right? But one of the things that we get a lot, it's not just about cleaning them up, but we get a lot of values in there that shouldn't be. In Themis, we have specific rules. We say only besides certain type of measurements, which we have a list of them, there should be no negative results. Okay, there should be no negative value as a number. So that's something we check. The other thing that I found very interesting is decimals, especially in like your drug exposure table. I mean, I've seen, I can understand, especially like in EHRs, you know, when you're in hospitals, people are given, you know, half a pill, or they're given a third of a pill, right, or a fourth of a pill at times. What I've seen in the data is they get 0.1/8 of a pill, okay? And I start asking, how do you give a person 1/8 of a pill? And well, the answer I got is you can, but you don't actually cut it up into like, because I'm thinking you cut it up into an eighth, right? But with a pill cutter. But they said, no, that's not how you do it. What you do is you smash the pill up into, you know, until it becomes powder, and you weigh it. And then what you do is you split out, you weigh it, and then you give them 1/8 of that weight and that powder, and they drink the powder. Like, okay, I guess 1/8 works. But I've seen them worse than 1/8. It's like 0.0001. So those are things that we get a lot that you might want to check while you are doing it. Zero values, we get a lot of zero values, we get a lot of null values, but then does it make sense to keep the null values, right? We're not saying that it doesn't make sense because some of these are valid, that you have the test but you don't have a result, right? So those are valid. You can have a test without results, like in clinical, like in doctor's office settings. You may not always get the lab results because the labs are somewhere else, right? But you know that a lab was actually ordered, right? So you would put that in measurements, but you just won't have a value for it. So, but what you need to do is just go and make sure you check up on that stuff, okay? The last issue we have, which we kind of covered already, is the whole no standard vocabulary. So you have to do a lot of custom mapping, and it takes time. So there's two different ways. You can have your own mapping team to do it, or you can actually go into the OMOP team and ask the OMOP OHDSI team to do your mapping for you. So what are some of my recommendations after, you know, going through all these issues and all these different little knickknacks with you guys? There are three that I recommend. One, and these are all free, right? Out in the OHDSI, there's the forum. So I'm sure most of you guys have been to the OHDSI forum, but if you're not, this is the OHDSI forum. And what you can do out here is you can, one, look at these guys and you can actually search for things, right? You can actually ask questions, search here, and it'll show you all the posts that we've had in the past. Or you can post your questions out here like this one. Somebody asked this question. Why isn't there a marital status column? Okay, and then someone will reply to you. And you have a 50-50 shot. It might be Christian, because Christian likes to read the forums for therapy, and he's on there like 24/7. And I'm not joking, he's on there 24/7. But you can do that in the forums, and a lot of people out there will very quickly respond to you. There's an actual CDM builder group here that you can come in if you're building your CDM and ask a bunch of questions in here. What do I do with lab values without tests? Exactly what I just said earlier, right? Click on it, someone will respond to you. You got Mark Time here, you got Patrick here who's been replying. So you can go out there. The second place you can go into is the wiki site. So out here in the wiki site, we have a lot of groups out here already. So some of you guys talked about, you guys may have EHRs. There's an actual EHR working group out here that talks about different types of EHR problems and how to solve them. I know this is not a time zone that works for you guys, but you can, you know, click on their recordings. They have meeting notes that they keep and all that fun stuff. They have other working groups out here, like the vocabulary working group, the oncology working group, all types of different working groups that you can look up their documentation about. The other wiki site that you can go to is the OMOP CDM wiki site. And that one, we actually are working on updating right now with a bunch more information, because we feel that this guy isn't as knowledgeable and as in-depth as we want it to be. So this is the CDM. So if you click on it, you will see that here are all the person table. This is the person table, the field, and then all the conventions are down here. What I said, themis conventions, they're all down here. You know, each person can only have certain attributes, blah, blah, so forth, and so forth. We're actually working on updating this to actually include like some ETL guidelines as well for some of this stuff. It's currently being developed. It probably will be released later on this year. I think we're almost done with it. And then the third thing is actually to form your own working group. So I know there's a bunch of you guys who in Australia who are doing OMOP CDMs right now. And you can maybe talk to the EHR working group and say, hey, we want to form one in the Eastern Hemisphere. Can we get some tools, get some tips on how you guys do that? And it allows the folks to collaborate and share, even amongst yourself, if you guys want to form one just in Australia, to share the information, to share the knowledge, to, you know, better help each other with the problems that you guys might have. So that would be my third, or form an ETL working group. We actually tried to do that in China, where we had weekly calls, and then we had a group chat where people were able to ask questions, and you know, we provided some technical guidelines for them there. So those are things that you guys can do to help. That is kind of the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, my email is actually on here. So feel free if you want to contact me for questions.
That's
so
awesome.
Now I guess we open up the floor.
Yes, thanks very much, Mui. That was a really nice journey through the process. So if anybody would like to ask a question, either unmute yourself and start talking, or just raise your hand. I think there's a raise hand function down the bottom. So any questions?
Nicole, could I start with a question? Roger in Melbourne. Yep. Mui, we've started the process of doing an OMOP conversion. I'm just wondering, we're using the standard OMOP tools and Odyssey tools. In terms of custom, do you use custom tools? What do you actually use for doing the conversions?
So for my team, we actually don't use a tool to do the conversion. We actually just write SQL, plain SQL. But what we do have is, like I mentioned earlier, we use a source control. So we check our code into SVN or GitLab. And then what we have with it are the continuous integration process that we have in place that we use Jenkins. And we have multiple environments that is set up so that we're able to better manage our code and better manage the deployment of our code from environment to environment to environment. So for example, I have a development environment where the developers play. I have a quality environment where the quality people play, because they might find bugs and they send it back to the developers, right? Then the developer changes the code. You don't want them on each other's toes, and data quality people don't like their data changing that much because they're still testing things, right? So we don't deploy out there as often. And then I have a production environment, where I rerun the ETLs because we do refreshes all the time, right? But then I have researchers who play in the environment as well. So my production environment can't be my research environment, because when I'm refreshing, and the analysis is running, they compete for the same CPU. Then I got all of them screaming at me, going, why is the database so slow? Right? So I have actually multiple environments, and to manage that, and to ensure that the code actually gets deployed properly to each one, because if you manually do it, you sometimes forget little things because you're like, oh, we didn't touch that one, but you really did, but they forgot, right? So we have an automated way of deploying things out.
Oh, okay, interesting. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mui. Any other question? Any other questions from people?
All right, I'm going to ask a question then, if nobody else has one. So, Mui, can you maybe just give us some insight or maybe some advice on, where to start? Sometimes I feel, you might have a data set available to you that you want to go through the process. I liked your idea of the sprint, timeline. Is that usually what you do first? You sit down and think that through and plan that out, or what's the approach?
Yeah, so my group, what we do is, the first thing we do is gather all the documentations and figure out who the resources are, right? So it's because it's like a project, because without the resources and them being dedicated on it, then it's very complicated to do. Like I said, I've had one in the United States that's a year and a half now, and they're still trying to get it done because they keep switching resources. Okay, so the first thing is to do that, and that's what we call sprint zero. So again, we try to do things in increments, chunks at a time to start, to say, okay, we may not know much about this, so as a group, let's learn how to do this. Let's give us 2 weeks. What's our target in 2 weeks, right? Our target could be just setting up the team and actually everybody reading the documentation and learning what the OMOP CDM is by watching tutorials, blah, 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 right? Then you plan what your next 2 weeks are. Then you plan what your next 2 weeks are. So then you're starting off slowly, as well as chunking them out so that you don't have such a big hurdle to overcome. Because if you try to do too many things at the same time and try to get too much accomplished, you're not going to be as successful, especially if you're brand new at things, right? And that's something, and I know this, and I know, upper management might be saying, but you guys are taking too long, right? So you got to have to convince them, we're going to be slow to start off with, to learn this stuff, right? But as we go, because your team also builds that connection with each other, and your efficiency goes up as well. So that's part of why we say dedicated resources, because then it's the same people, right? You can't finish each other's sentences, but you can, collaborate with each other a lot more effectively if you have the same team for 3 months, right? It's no different in research than a conversion project. Same people, much faster.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? No?
Did I talk too fast?
No, not at all. You're probably too clear. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mui, again, and for staying up late tonight to do this.
No problem.
It's been wonderful. Like I said, we'll upload the recording as soon as possible on the website, and please distribute. And we will be having another OHDSI Australia webinar probably in another 4 weeks' time. We haven't got the presenter locked in just yet, but look out for that advertisement. And with that, thanks again, Mui. And
you're welcome.
Please send your questions if to ask them in this forum to Mui or to myself or Roger, and we can get you in contact with whoever might be best to answer that question. So
I have to say, I am very impressed with OHDSI Australia. Okay, you guys haven't started that long. Like I said, I deal with all the Asia Pacific ones, and I know I work in the OHDSI US ones as well, right, and the EU ones. To have what you guys have done, get this much participation and have monthly meetings with speakers in them, it's very impressive. I run part of the OHDSI China one, and I can't get half the time someone to present. And as many people as you guys have participate in this. You guys are off to a great start, and keep up the great work in Australia.
Thank you. We're very excited and hope this really, creates a groundswell of people who are interested in this work. So we're excited. And as Mui mentioned, there will be an Asia Pacific Odyssey Symposium in December. Help me out, Mui, with the date. December 5th
and 6th.
5th and 6th.
Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, registrations are open. Please go to the Odyssey Australia website, Odyssey website, and the link is also on the Odyssey Australia website. And please submit a poster presentation. So we will be having a Australia chapter day on the second day where we will be talking about people's research. So please get involved and come along to that meeting.
One last thing, sorry. Yeah. Also look out for the, we're actually doing tutorials during the US Symposium, which is October 18th. But we've also decided we haven't figured out how many of the tutorials we're doing and what the format is, but we are trying to do an Eastern Hemisphere version of the same tutorials. We're actually gonna have that discussion tomorrow during our APAC steering committee call. But look out for those. They will open up for registration soon, probably by the end of this week out on the Odyssey website. It is a first come, first serve because there will be limits to the seating of how many people can join the tutorials, but there are 4 that are being offered. I don't know if all 4 will be offered in the Eastern Hemisphere, but it is the OMOP CDM and vocabulary tutorial, the oncology tutorial, the Odyssey ecosystem tutorial, and the data quality tutorial. So those are the 4 that we're looking at trying to set up for the Asia Pacific side. So it'll be during your time zone. It won't be during the US time zone. We're trying. We're hoping we can do that. So look out for that. But again, it's a first come, first serve basis because most of them do have a seat limit. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody. Thanks again.